Hey, Crystal, how are you? I see a bunch of folks jumping into the room here. How's everybody?
Hi.
All right, I'll give you guys a minute. You might have just tried to jump in early, but I had the Zoom room locked up with another class I just finished. So we'll give people a chance to get themselves in. How was everyone's weekend? Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there.
Hi again.
Hey, long time no see. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Everybody have a good Father's Day weekend?
Yes.
Good. All righty. So as we're waiting for some folks, tell me about your weekend. Anybody do an open house or anything going on in the real estate space this weekend? How was this weekend for you guys? Have everybody muted as soon as you jump in. So I'd love for you to selectively unmute. Did anybody do an open house this weekend? I know that a lot of questions come up. Should we do them on Father's Day and Mother's Day? Should we not do them? Is that bad form? All that stuff. Anybody out there? And I just want to try to get a thumb on the pulse of how it feels out there right now on this weekend. I see Heidi's face. Are you talking, Heidi? Because I can't hear you right now. So try to unmute. Maybe I'll try to unmute everybody. All right, now I'm going to try again. Anybody? Weekend activities?
Well, hi Hal. I took my buyers out yesterday, 2 sets of buyers, and they were not at all turned off by it being Father's Day. I didn't do any open houses, but I did take some buyers out yesterday.
Yeah, good. You know, here's the thing about, Mother's Day, Father's Day is it is a family time a lot of times. And yet a lot of times people's parents aren't necessarily here. They live in other parts of the country. In some instances, they're not around any longer. Who knows what? I don't have a huge problem myself with doing open houses on days like that. I personally, my own personal feeling, and this is my personal feeling, you get to run your business any way that you like. I personally tend to stay off of holidays that have more of a sort of a religious importance to folks. I think as a sign of respect, I tried not to do opens on those days. Mother's Day, Father's Day, Super Bowl Sunday, none of those, I didn't usually have a problem with that, and I thought that there was usually some pretty good traffic. All right, anything else? All right, we're going to jump in then, and we've got 15 people in the room. I'm going to just sort of key this up by starting to say this is a reschedule from Friday. As you guys know, I guess it was really late in the day on Thursday that I learned that Keller Williams had decided to make Juneteenth, the 19th of June, a paid company holiday. And while I know that as a real estate agent, there is no such thing as a paid holiday, I get that. I do think it's significant, and I'm proud of this organization for the step that we've taken. And I mentioned this in the 10 o'clock group. We're not the first company who has recognized the significance of the 19th of June and chose to elevate that as something important enough to give time off for. There's lots of companies who've done that before us. However, I would say lots. There's some. We're the first real estate company that I'm aware of, at least the first major real estate company that's chosen to do that. And in the email that Gary sent out to everyone, and if you didn't see that email, I know Al Donahue posted it on Facebook. You can go back and talk about it, or look at it rather. What Gary said is it's not enough in this day and age simply to choose to say, I don't participate myself personally in activities of overt racism, and because I don't do things myself, I'm good. Gary's stand and the leadership of this company's stand is, yeah, that is good, but it's not good enough. If you're not proactively doing things to address and remedy the issue, then it's just not enough. Especially if you're a guy like me, a fairly successful white guy who's had privilege and path open up before them. And I don't want to get into a preaching session here. But I am really, really, really proud of this organization for being the first in the real estate space to take a stand and say, this is important enough that we're going to close down our company. And that decision was made, it seemed to me, rapidly. Everything sort of came together quickly. So as a result, this class got canceled from Friday and pushed into today. So we're going to be a little behind the curve. I'm not going to try to condense any longer in terms of the content. What we're simply going to do is take the content and just add on, right? So we'll just go a week longer. But this is the session today on for sale by owners and expired. So give me a moment to get the PowerPoint up. Go ahead. Was that somebody jumping in? No? Okay. I hope you can see my screen. Somebody just give me a thumbs up or a unmute to let me know that you can see my PowerPoint. There's Heidi's thumb. That's a very lovely thumb there, Heidi. Thank you for that. All right, so we're going to go from the current slide, for sale by owners and expireds. And so if you remember where we are in the Parthenon, right? We've built all these platform conversations about positioning and marketing. I'm getting some weird feedback. I don't know if that's my mic. If you guys are hearing that, hopefully we'll be able to correct that. Then we talked about working with your database, just how critically important. In the last class that I just did, the launch class at 10, we were talking about modeling and how successful people model the success of others who come before them and figure things out. The reason why we spend so much time on database management is that's simply the way that the most successful agents have success, is they focus on building and nurturing a database. And yet, there's other things that we need to do that act as funnels to get relationships into that database. And there's other ways that we can do other lead generation activities around the edges. We talked about farming and open houses last time. And we're going to talk now about expireds. And just as a backtrack, we finished early on the open houses last time because, as you remembered, I only had 1 hour. And we had on Wednesday the Bergen County Partners all-staff meeting. And what happened was we ended up not getting through that module in its entirety. What I intend to do with that, just so that you know, is rather than try to jam too much into today and give short shrift to this, I'm going to do a standalone class on open houses where we're going to really spend some time and do a deep dive on that within the next couple of weeks. So watch for that and cycle back in on that if you'd like to. But today is for sale by owners and expireds is where we're going as one of the primary sources of lead generation and building your business. And it's first thing we have to think about is, you know, when we say for sale by owners, which is what FSBO stands for, just so that you're clear, FSBO stands for sale by owner. I've also heard it said that it also stands for the fastest source of business opportunity, which I think is a really neat play on words there. FSBO, fastest source of business opportunity. Yes, in fact, one of the things that we know about both of these, FSBOs and expireds, is that they either, they're in the market or around the edges of the market. They're either trying to sell or they had tried to sell. So we know that if we focus on this group of people, there's a higher likelihood that they're going to need us, right? Than if we just randomly go out and talk to anyone. They're seen because of the opportunity so similar that we often say those words in the same sentence all the time. FSBOs and expireds is kind of squished into one word. It's FSBOs and expireds. It's not for sale by owners as a separate idea from expireds, and they're very different. But let's just talk about what the opportunity looks like. For starters, when we think about people selling privately, and private sales account for, you know, according to NAR, National Association of Realtors, 4% of all deed transfers that happen in the United States are what we call closed market for sale by owners, meaning that they never intended to go on the market. They never needed a broker to intervene in the sale of that home. There was a buyer and a seller that had predetermined that this transaction was going to happen, and they didn't need a marketing element to it. Frequently we have in situations like this, family members selling to other family members, you know, grandma sells the house to the son, that sort of thing. That counts for about 4% of all deed transfers. The other thing, if you start to take a look at it, is about 9% of all deeds transferred are really what we call open market FSBOs. We're going to talk about those today. The people that are selling on, they are going on the market, they're just doing it without representation. That accounts for about 9% of all the deeds transferred. And 87% of deed transfers in general are brokered, right? They're not for sale by owner. They are for sale with representation, right? Those are the ones that we traditionally think of when we think about the real estate opportunity. Some more stats, and I've got everybody muted right now because there's a little bit of background noise, but anybody who wants to chime in and comment on these or throw in the chat box, I'll watch for that. Who are these folks? And why are they choosing to be marketed without an agent? Well, 47% of them, the primary reason why they didn't want to hire brokers because they didn't want to pay a commission. And, you know, I think that's short-sighted, and you know we'll talk about that today. That one of the things that we can do is create a bigger market for a private seller than they can create on their own. Typically, when you buy something from a private seller, what you would expect to do is to get it cheaper, right? Because there's no markup, inflated markup of having a middleman put in. And so it's interesting because one of the challenges that for sale by owners have is that they don't want to pay a commission. They think it's going to lead them to more money, and yet the buyers in that model are more interested in saving the money themselves. And so we've got this tug of war, but 47% didn't want to pay the commission. If you take a look at the ones that actually sold, a third of those, the seller actually did end up selling to someone that they already knew. 2/3 of those almost were the market came to them. If you look at the next thing, the next for sale by owner, 24% sold to a relative friend or neighbor. Those are including a lot of the closed market ones. The buyer contacted the seller directly in 15% of all private transactions. And if you look at that, there's a 50-50 split between the seller knew the buyer already and the buyer raised their hand and said, hey, you know what, I just want to let you know. And if you ever sell that house, it's a beautiful house. If you ever sell it, talk to me first. You know, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. You know, there's a lot of people that have put, you know, conversations like that into the ether. I know neighbors who have looked at other neighbors' houses and said to my neighbors, look, if you ever sell, before you sell, I just think your house is so special. I'd love to talk to you about it. About half of the for sale by owners are the private sales. The buyer and the seller knew each other directly about 50% of the time. The buyer didn't contact the seller directly, came through marketing efforts, right? 8% of the private sale, they just didn't want to deal with a real estate agent. They just didn't like real estate agents. They didn't like us. They didn't trust us. Who knows what that is about? You know, maybe they had a bad experience with a real estate agent before. You know, maybe they had this crazy aunt who was a real estate agent, and she just kind of was the aunt that always would squeeze their face. Oh, you're so cute. And they're like, I just can't take you. And they have such a bad impression. Who knows what? But there is a core group of folks that just don't like realtors, and they will never use one. That is not your market, and it is a waste of time to try to have a religious conversion for that person, because there's so many other opportunities where you could spend time and get a better result. Agents weren't able to sell the home part of the time. Seller had a real estate license and sold it on their own. Note to self, nothing makes your broker more frustrated than when the agent in the brokerage chooses to not list the home. And it's not really so much that the broker feels that they want to earn the company dollar side of that commission. It's less that. It's more the public presentation that agent is saying when neighbors see, and the neighbors know that Mary is an agent with XYZ company, but she's not using XYZ company. She must not really think that her own company is very good. If Mary doesn't think they're very good, maybe I shouldn't even think about them either. That's the thing, the message that's communicated when agents sell their homes themselves, and why brokers get crazy about that. But anyway, this is the breakdown of who they are, right? Expireds and withdrawal listings. The main reason why houses didn't sell, these are also, you know, people, when we think about expireds and withdrawn, why did that happen? You know, why did it not sell? Is the reason that the house didn't sell that there was an inherent flaw in the marketing? Is there a reason why the house didn't sell that there was inherent change in the need of the sellers? I had a transaction one time years ago where I represented a seller of a home in Berkeley Heights who was a buyer in North Carolina. And the reason why that they were buying a home in North Carolina was because their daughter, who lived in North Carolina, was pregnant with their first grandchild, and they were at the age where they were going to be downsizers anyway. They could have stayed in their house It was perfectly functional for them to stay in, but they wanted to be closer to the grandchild. Well, long story short, we put the house on the market. We got it under contract. They bought a house in North Carolina. We were about a week away from these coordinated closings when I got that phone call that Houston, we've got a problem, right? Nobody likes that phone call. What happened was she had just learned that her daughter and her husband, who were due to have that baby in about 2 or 3 months, that the husband who worked in the banking industry in North Carolina was just transferred to a branch, an office back in New York. And now they were just ready to uproot everything to go to North Carolina to be with their family, and the family was leaving to come back to New York. And you can't make this stuff up sometimes. And guess what? They said to me, look, what do we do? We don't want to move to North Carolina anymore. If they're not there, there's no reason for us to go. They ended up breaching both contracts, and they paid some penalty to do it. But there's reasons why houses don't sell. And sometimes it's life conditions, life situations change, right? What would be the primary reason? I'm going to ask you guys to unmute or put in the chat because I want some interaction here. What is the primary reason why homes on the market do not go under contract and sell? Anybody chime in?
Overpriced.
Overpriced. Who said that? Cassie, did you say that?
Yes, Casey, yes.
Casey, whose fault is that?
The agent.
You are my favorite today. It is the agent's fault. As much as I hate to say that, and I have been guilty of pricing homes, not intentionally to overprice the home, but early on I wasn't as good at really gauging the price of the home. If we take a home overpriced because we want to buy the listing, shame on us. You know, one of the things that I will tell you is that we know for a fact, it's been empirically proven 1,000 times over, that the best way to get the best price is actually to price the home at market value or even a smidge under. Because if you can price it right at where the market sees the value, the most interested buyers in the marketplace immediately are going to take notice, and they're going to start to bid, and you can start to generate market pressure, market urgency, and multiple bidding, pushing that price even higher than it could have possibly otherwise gone. That's the best way to do it. If we go out there, and I'm not suggesting that anyone in this group right now of 18 would do this, but I was told early on by a colleague of mine, just go out there and just blow some crazy ass number out there and just blow them out of the water. They're going to see such green dollar signs that they're going to want to take a shot and just try to see if maybe you can deliver on that number. And you and I both know that number's not real, but now you've got them locked up for 6 months. And now what you can do is over time, when you're not getting any results, they're going to come around and you're going to bring the price down. And you might have to have 1 price correction or 2 price corrections, but eventually it's going to get sold. They're going to move on and you're going to get the deal. If that's your belief, my personal recommendation is that you should get your ass out of this industry. And here's why I'm so angry about that. Because people's home equity, for most Americans, their home equity is their primary asset. Most Americans do not have gobs and gobs of investment money sitting in investment portfolios. And we talk about, you know, how the stock market is up and how the stock market is great and how wonderful our economy is because the stock market, which is good, but most people aren't really participating in a meaningful way in those kinds of investments. For most people, everything that they've got is in the equity of their home. And if we employ a marketing strategy which squanders that equity, because we know that if you price it too high, it's not going to sell. But what happens in the process is the home is going to be seen as such damaged goods that the market will never pay again what they would have paid the first time had you priced it properly. If your goal is to overprice the home to secure a listing, at the risk of the homeowner's equity, the same home equity that they're counting on to pay for their retirement, to pay for their daughter's wedding, to pay for their mother's nursing home, if you're going to squander that equity, get out of this industry. There's enough people with integrity to do the business. I get really agitated. I'm sorry that I get so fired up about this. But there are so many properties that expire because some dumbass told them it was worth something that it wasn't, and they knew better. But the reason why houses don't sell is because the market doesn't see the value in the home. Value is a combination of location, condition, and price. And at the location and in the condition, the market just didn't see the willingness to pay that price, right? And so if we can have a conversation with folks and figure out, why were you trying to sell in the first place? Is that reason important enough that you're willing to reposition it in a place that can actually get sold? Is it a conversation worth having? I will tell you that right now, today, June, whatever today is, 21st, 22nd, I think today that the opportunity for expired listings as a lead generation source for the next 30 to 45 days is going to be massive. And the window won't stay open forever. In fact, it might not even be a 45-day window, but here's what I do know. 2019 was the strongest year in New Jersey residential resale history. In the history of time, as long as we've been tracking, we've never had a stronger housing market in New Jersey than we had in 2019. And pre-pandemic, January and February of 2020 were on pace to be even stronger. The fundamentals and the economic condition that we had been pre-pandemic was super, super strong. You shouldn't have expired in that market. If you expired in that market, it simply meant that your price was so wrong. And I don't know whether it's because you were convinced by a dummy who told you that it was worth more than it was, or you were just stubbornly greedy and weren't willing to accept market. If you're not willing to accept market value, then I'm not so sure that this market's going to get a whole lot better for you. What we do expect, and if you look at some of the prognosticators like the Jeff Ottos of the world, who are really seen as the housing gurus of everything New Jersey housing related, he is expecting through the remainder of 2020, once we open up the economy and we start to, in a safe way, open up, showing homes and all that stuff, he's expecting to see a bump in home prices. He's expecting to see the demand push volume price up. And I think he could be right. But the reason why homes don't sell is because where it is in the condition that it is, I ain't paying that. That's the issue. And so here's what we got to think about is how are we going to approach these? Overall, relative to the existing market, it was overpriced, or it was in poor condition, or it wasn't marketed well. All of those things take second, third, fourth place to the fact that it just didn't sell because the market didn't respond. By the time it goes on the MLS and it expires, the agents know it's there. Any agent worth his salt knows the inventory that's being marketed in their marketplace. So you can't tell me that it wasn't marketed well because the agents who control the buyers know it was there. All right, a quick thing before we get into technique. I do have to just remind you about the do not call list. The do not call list is a thing. Keller Williams as a company is a plaintiff, if you will. I think that's the right word. Or actually the defendant in one of the biggest class action lawsuits in the history of class action lawsuits. And it's not just Keller Williams, it's virtually every real estate brand and every single association of realtors and MLS in the country that's being sued for encouraging our agents to purposely violate the do not call list. The federal government has created the do not call list to stop harassing and predatory sales on over the telephone. And there have been accusations that as coaches, we tell people, and trainers, we tell people, you know what, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. Just call everybody, and if anybody gets pissed off, apologize and move on. That's not a stand that I can support and would support. There are enough people out there to talk to who are accessible. You do need to honor the do not call list, right? So I don't want to bang that drum too hard, but I do want to talk about it. There is a limiting belief out there with this population of sellers. And here's the limiting belief. You can only succeed with for sale by owners and expired listings and withdrawals for that matter by being super aggressive and being super direct. And that is a limiting belief. I think sometimes that belief is perpetuated by some of the language that we use as trainers and as coaches. We think about certain kinds of lead generation as hunting, as proactively and going and getting what I want, as opposed to other things we think of, for example, things like farming, which is cultivating relationship over time. For sale by owners and expireds, it's kind of seen as more hunting. I'm going after you. And here's the thing that I'll tell you about hunting is, there is in society this idea that if you want to eat, sometimes you have to hunt. But I think the imagery, as it relates at least to prospecting and lead generation, is unfortunate because the imagery sort of has out there that you're prey and I'm coming to get you. And let me tell you something, nobody wants to be the gazelle the day that the tiger shows up. And if people perceive themselves as threatened by a predatory aggressor, they will become afraid and they will become very defensive. It's the reason why the do not call list was implemented in the first place, because there was just too much of that predatory lead generation going on in all industries. And I think what happens is if we show up and we go after this population of folks and they've never seen us before, they don't have any idea who we are, they're not part of our primary market and they don't have any exposure to our brand, they're going to feel as though they're being preyed. It's one of the reasons why these are sometimes seen as low-hanging fruit, but I've always said that this particular type of lead generation is the hardest to pick because they are the most resistant, because they do not want to talk to you. And while that's an objection to overcome, and I know a lot of folks have even gamified that idea to say, this is going to be kind of fun. It's the thrill of the hunt. I'm going to figure out strategies to overcome your resistance and I'm going to get you. I think that there's a lot of resistance to that. And I will tell you that if you ever study nature, one of the things that you find out is that the big cat animals, the big cats, the ones who hunt for their prey, they're hungry most of their existence. They don't hunt for sport. They hunt to fend off starvation. They hunt when they are so unhappy or so uncomfortable, or their cubs are, that they extort to that level of what it takes to get things done. The truth is, you can really win with this population if you come from contribution, if you build relationships, establish trust, and you're not seen as so scary, right? And I'm going to tell you that one of the ways that we make ourselves scary with this population is to use old scripts. We're going to talk about that in a second, because so many of the scripts that we use were written circa 1970, circa 1980, and we are in post-internet age and certainly post-social media age. We are in an environment now where the population is far more informed and they're far less trusting. And scripts that sound too salesy are going to trigger inside of people this bias of, you're the tiger, you're threatening, you're a salesperson, I don't like salespeople. And so what I'm going to suggest is there's different ways to use different scripts, to update different scripts to have more success with this group. But the truth is you can be very successful if you come from contribution and you don't see people as prey that you need to go hunt to earn your keep. All right, the bias that we're going to talk about, and we touched on it before, what we've said a million times in other classes is that the human brain works in a pattern recognition way, that when we see patterns, we develop shortcuts. We call those heuristics. And what happens is people have had enough experience with salespeople to not like us. And so they have this bias. When I see you as a salesperson, I know that salespeople are pushy, they're self-serving, they're dishonest, all these terrible things. And so the moment that we show up and look and behave and act like a salesperson, we're seen as a threat. Automatic, you can't prevent it, but you can work with it. And so the way that you work with it is you don't show up as a stranger. The more comfortable people are when we trigger the familiarity bias. Remember, we talked about this in the module where we talked about marketing and farming, and that we talked about marketing and prospecting. Our business has to be prospecting based. We've got to go out and make things happen, but it's marketing enhanced, because if through familiarity of our marketing, people can become familiar with who we are. They've seen our marketing material. They've seen us sponsor a Little League team in town. They've seen us collecting canned goods at the supermarket for a local food bank. Whatever the thing is, that we're not seen as a stranger, we're not seen as a threat. Through our marketing and our connecting, we can start to have an easier way to not trigger that sense of, I don't like salespeople bias that happens when we show up as strangers. It's one of the reasons why, and I'll talk about it, I think, in another slide or two. I am not suggesting, while I didn't personally work with this particular group of leads in any meaningful way for FSBO and Expireds, I built my business on the back of networking and open houses. However, I'm not saying you shouldn't work this. There's people out there who are very, very good at this. The thing that I will tell you, though, is that the models that show the agents that have the most success, they focus on all the expired listings and all the for sale by owners inside of their target geographic market. And they don't spend a whole lot of time trying to talk to that same for sale by owner and expired group outside of their geographic market. And the reason for that is inside the footprint of the market where they're doing their marketing and prospecting, they already have brand recognition. They've already got familiarity. And so when I show up and I see that you're selling your home privately, or I see that you tried to sell your home unsuccessfully and I want to have that conversation with you, when I show up as someone who is not the tiger, who you know I'm a real estate agent, and you've seen some good things that I do, and you see my involvement in the community, it's less threatening than if the first time you've ever heard my name is through the for sale by owner call. An old Mike Ferry script from way back when has a line in it that says, are you familiar with the things that I do to get a home sold? And the belief is because they don't know you, there's no way they could be. And so the answer to that is going to be no. And when you say, no, you're not, that it opens the door for you to invite yourself to schedule time to show them. And while the logic to that made sense in the 1980s, what I can tell you is that line is one that generates a lot of resistance right now, because we're in a world where these folks are more savvy than that. And when they hear, have you heard, do you know what I do to get home sold? And you say no, it just feels like a trick. It feels like a linguistic trick, which in fact it is to some degree. What I'm suggesting is try to work within their geographic footprint for sub-owners and expireds and go outside of that footprint selectively. Because if they don't know who you are, they're going to see you as the line. All right. We use techniques of how to break down resistance early on, mirroring and matching the intonation. We're not going to get deep into this today. We're not even going to get into this today. But just to highlight the things that I can do in terms of the intonation of my voice, in terms of volume and tone and rate of speech, and listening to the language patterns that people use. Are people more visual or auditory in their language? Meaning, do they speak in ways that imply that they are using visual language? Can anybody unmute so I can take a sip of water here and give me an example of what visual language might sound like? Anybody? What would the example be? Go ahead.
Just your body language. In other words, how you present your physical affect. I mean, if you're going to get the opportunity, the lucky opportunity to get in front of a FSBO rather than a phone, just your eye contact, the way you lean forward. You know,
all those things, Paul, super important in terms of matching and mirroring, right? Absolutely, right? You know, leaning, all that gesturing. I'm interested, though, specifically, Paul, about visual language. What do you think visual language, when someone is speaking in a way that their perspective in the world is a visual perspective, how would that language sound? Do you have any ideas or could give an example of that? I'll give it to you. For example, when somebody says, I just don't see what that has to do with anything. I just don't see why I can't list it at that price. I don't see is visual language. Someone who's more auditory, right, listening, would say things like, I hear you, but I just, you know, I just want to do it anyway, right? That doesn't sound like a good strategy to me. That doesn't sound is auditory language. Kinesthetic language, which is the language of action, which is touching and feeling, right? Something doesn't feel right about this, right? What we do in mirroring and matching at a super high level, if you really want to get into neurolinguistic programming, you're going to listen for that kind of language pattern and try to respond in a way that syncs up. So for example, when someone says, I can't see why we don't list the house at this price, the response is not, well, let me tell you, because telling is auditory. What would be better would be, let me show you, because showing is visual. We want the responses in the language to match up when somebody says, hey, I hear you, however, I want to list this price at this price anyway. Well, let me tell you then why I think that's a challenge, right? Because we're telling and we're hearing all staying inside the auditory. Again, don't want to get deep into this. My point though is this. When you learn about this and study this, one of the things you're going to find is you will build rapport faster. You know, if you ever study Milton Erickson, which is one of the great hypnotherapists of all time, someone that I studied extensively in graduate school when I studied to be a clinician, he really is the master of really the mirroring and the matching and all these different things to start to induce what they call hypnotic trance. And trance, and it's, you know, when you think about trance, a lot of us have this image of the cartoons where, you know, they have somebody who takes out the pocket watch and they're dangling it back and forth and you're watching it with your eyes and they're like, you're getting sleepy, and all of a sudden your eyes are spinning around and then you can do whatever you want, right? That's not trance. What trance is, if I can get you to feel that I am like you, if the way that we speak sounds the same, if the way that we gesture looks the same, if the way that our language patterns of auditory, kinesthetic, and all that stuff sync up, what you're going to begin to think is that I'm like you. And if I can be enough like you, then I can establish this familiarity to a point where I feel so safe to you that you will be more susceptible to my suggestion because you're so resistant, you're so less resistant to it. That's the essence of what hypnotrance is. It's not kind of getting people to glaze over. It's just feeling like, oh my God, we are so in sync with each other that if you tell me to do something, I'm going to do it because I feel that sense of connection with you, right? And it's a skill that can be learned and should in the mirroring and matching. All right, I want to move on. All this is important to think about how do we work with this population because this is the population. While its low-hanging fruit is the hardest to pick, these are the ones that are far and away the most resistant to us. The mere exposure effect, which we touched on before in the marketing side, simply says the more they see you again and again and again, not only do I become familiar with you, but there's a tipping point when familiarity actually tips and becomes preference. That's the essence of marketing again and again and again and again and again. At some point, I'm going to love Coca-Cola because I've seen that enough times. Last night at Father's Day dinner, my daughter was here and we were talking and she says, you ever know how you hear a song on the radio and the first time you hear it, you're like, God, that song's kind of sucky. I can't believe that they came out with this song. And then you hear it again and again and you're like, you know what? It's kind of catchy. I'm kind of used to it. And then at some point you find yourself like singing it to yourself. You love it. And it's simply because you were exposed to it enough times that you established preference for it. If you can show up for the for sale by owner and the expired opportunity as the preferred realtor of choice, you've already got the deal won, right? All right, let's talk about the model. Prospecting based, marketing enhanced. We touched on this before. Marketing creates familiarity with people. They're less afraid, they're less resistant, they're more willing to hear us out and more willing to trust. When our first approach to offer to help is as a stranger, they're more afraid, they're more resistant, they're less willing to listen, they're less willing to trust. Keep that in mind when you're doing these calls into markets where you're unknown. One of the reasons why I believe Big Rob has got his head on every billboard and every bus in New Jersey, not every billboard, but you know who I'm talking about, Rob Dukansky, who sells homes guaranteed. The reason why he's doing this, I believe, we had an enormous price tag. I don't know how much he spends on that. I was talking to one of his lenders, one of his lending partners a number of months ago, who said at that point he was paying for over 700 billboards and was just about to launch his campaign with New Jersey Transit for buses and trains. I know what billboard advertising costs. That probably is a 7-figure number, that marketing campaign in New Jersey between billboards and buses. Not all of us have the bandwidth to do that. Rob is one of the top agents in the RE/MAX system in the world. But the point is this, when we think about doing this as a lead generation opportunity inside of our footprint, we're just gonna have more success, right? So let's move over to the opportunity. The ways to win with this group, certainly we wanna see if there's an opportunity to get a listing. With the Expired group, especially if they are not prepared to realign the price of that home to what is market value now, it may not be worth taking it on. If you expired in 2019, you were stubborn or blatantly poorly informed, but in a lot of ways, probably stubborn. Because for a typical 6-month listing, without any kinds of opportunity to see that things were going well, if you didn't adjust to get where you needed to be, you're probably kind of stubborn. If I can't convince you to do the right thing now, I'm not sure if you're a good listing for me, because the last thing that I need are listings that are not saleable. The reason why I said that I thought the next 30 days would be an interesting opportunity is because most of the inventory that expired in the fourth quarter or late third quarter of 2019 intended to come back on the market in the spring. What tends to happen is if you expire in October or November, you generally speaking don't believe that there's a lot of energy left in the marketplace at that time of year. What most people do is they say, we're going to take a breather through the holidays and we're going to go out into the spring market again and try this again. When most people think about the spring market, while we know that mid-January and February is actually statistically the best time to put a house on the market if you want to get the highest market value, most sellers think March, April. They really think when the spring is a little bit, deeper on, we put it on the market in maybe April and May and June, it gets under contract and people buy and move over the summer. Well, here's what happened. All of those third and fourth quarter expireds who planned to put their house back on in the spring got COVIDed and the pandemic hit and they didn't come on. But now that things are opening up, they're coming out again. They're already reaching out and beginning to find agents on their own. And so what I would suggest is that window will close. That inventory is going to be on the market probably within the next 45 or 60 days. Try to get out in front of it, right? The ways we win with for sale by owners isn't just to get the listing and the referral if we can. Oh, and by the way, I want to touch on referrals. I see that Heidi had to jump out. She's going to an appointment. Have a good appointment, Heidi. Good luck to it. For sale by owners and expires can also be sources of referrals if you consistently come from value and contribution. I remember many times coaching agents who would be trying to work with for sale by owners. And one of the things that happened is the FSBO actually sold on their own. And that sometimes happens, right? I always believe that a private sale will never get as much as a fully marketed sale for lots of different reasons. However, there's times when in building that relationship, they haven't decided to hire an agent and they sell the house on their own. And I've heard more than one instance where people have had friends come back later and say, hey, you know what, Hal, you sold your house on your own. I'm thinking about selling my own house. Tell me what the benefit is of doing it privately. And they talked about what they saw as the benefit and what they saw as the burdens of being a private seller, and then went on to say, but if you ever did decide that you wanted to hire an agent, my recommendation would be to reach out to Erin, because she was really, really helpful for me. She knows what she's doing. If I was going to hire an agent, she'd probably be the one. You want to be that source of referrals. Even if the listing doesn't come, the referrals can, and in many instances still do, because friends want to talk about the FSBO experience. You can find the buyer for the house, right? If they're privately sold, I would encourage you to try to sell it. You could also help the seller be a buyer for another house, right? One of the great scripts that we used to teach in Bold actually begins reaching out to private sellers for sale by owners by asking the question, hey, I see that you're selling your house privately. I'm curious, when you sell the house, where are you moving to? And it doesn't really matter what their answer is. Their answer could be, we're moving to Cincinnati, or their answer could be, we're staying local, because the next question would be, the reason I asked you that is because every day I spend time contacting people that I know who are in the process of moving to see if they would be a good candidate for any of the listing inventory that I already have. Because that, in fact, is what you would want an agent to do for you if you're ever in the market to hire an agent, isn't it? Right? It says, look, I'm not seeing you as a potential seller. I know that unless you're selling your house with the intention of becoming homeless, you're going to need to live somewhere. And I am proactively going to find buyers for the inventory that I have. It's part of what I do in my marketing. I proactively go out there and make the market happen. And so I'm seeing you as a seller. It's what we call a pattern interrupt, and we'll talk about those again later. When you show up in a way that they don't expect you to show up, it kind of frustrates that salesperson bias. You're not looking like what I expected a salesperson to look like. You're not doing or saying the things that I expected a salesperson to do. Maybe you're different, and it opens up the door to lower that resistance, right? Certainly there's an opportunity to refer sellers out of town if that's where they're going. There's an opportunity to hold a potential open house for sale by owner. and we'll touch on that. There's a potential opportunity to write up business if the seller finds a buyer on their own. You could, with your broker's permission, you could just be a transaction agent and say, look, you know what, I've got a lot of systems in place, contract to close systems, to make sure that things get done and the ball doesn't get dropped. I do this all day, every day. You may have never done this yourself before. If you do find a buyer on your own, if you want, for a fee that we negotiate, I will take it from there. I won't offer you representation. I'm not representing you or the buyer, but I'll make sure that the checklist gets done and we get to a closing table and kind of keep things moving. And that's something that you could do. Lots of places in the country, that's pretty common. It's not as common here. Talk to your broker before you offer that in terms of what your broker would be willing to allow and what they would want to sort of think about in terms of a fee for that service. But that's certainly something that you could do. There's two kinds of approaches here. And in the manual, which I may have accessible here, hold on for 1 second. In the manual for this course, you're going to find there's two approaches. There's a direct approach with Diana Kokoska, and there is a slightly more indirect approach. And I'm just digging into my classes here. I had this all queued up earlier this morning so I wouldn't have to waste time in real time to do this. And then what happened was right before I went into this class, I had to reboot my computer and I lost it. So I'm going back to it. So if you let me share my screen here with you, what I should find is, there it is. Somebody just chime in and tell me they can see the screen here that has the lead generation manual in it.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm going to shrink this down so that it is a size that is readable. I'm just going to scroll here because I want to show you two different approaches. One is Diana. And anybody who knows Diana Kokoska, she used to be the president of our Keller Williams Maps coaching company. I met Diana many, many times, and she is a very good, gifted sales coach and very successful sales professional in her own right. And this was Diana's approach. Let me make this a little bit larger. If you read it, she says, hey, when it comes to working with for sale by owners and expireds, Diana favors the direct approach. Be honest and straightforward with people, she feels, and they will learn to trust you. First, however, she's going to ask for permission. She's going to ask the question, do you want me to be honest with you? Most people grant her that wish. There's very few people when you ask them, do you want me to be 100% honest with you, that are going to say, no, I'd really prefer that you lie to me. When you ask people, do you want me to be candid and honest, they're going to be saying yes, typically. And Diana, she favors the call them first and call them often approach. She would call newly expired listings between 7 and 8 in the morning. And keep in mind, this is do not call list days. It would be illegal to call someone at 7 o'clock in the morning, even if you have permission. The telephone canvassing rules require you to wait, right? You can't call at 7. But she was sort of kind of in your face. Diana's approach is, look, I'm here. I'm the best there is. Let's get this done. I'm in your face. And she was really successful. And if you know Diana, a high-driven, high-D personality, it fit her style. And it worked really well for her. Another approach is Gene Grubb. And Gene's approach was to say, I'm going to build a relationship with you over time. What I know and what I expect is that for sale by owners, we're going to talk about expired separately in a second, but for sale by owners typically want to give it a go for a while. And I'm going to kind of hang with you during that period of time. And so she's going to make an arrangement, she says. She never asked right away for the listing. She felt that that was too not assaultive, but too direct, right? What she said was, I'm going to make an appointment to preview the house. And then when I preview the house, I'm going to look for an opportunity to do something to add value. And then I'm going to stay in touch. And when I stay in touch, I'm going to look for another opportunity to add value. Then I'm going to stay in touch and add more value and add more value. And over time, what my anticipation is that what we know is that most people trying to sell privately eventually hire an agent. And I want to be the one who gets that invite call. I want to be the one who is seen as the person that you want to talk to. It kind of goes back when we did the marketing module. Remember the story that I talked about in terms of the 8x8 and how the 8x8 was created. And I mentioned there was a company called Hobbs Herder. And what Hobbs Herder did is they created Mary Jones, the fake agent, and she worked for XYZ company, the fake real estate company. And once a week for 8 weeks, they sent her stuff, her branded stuff, into a neighborhood and then interviewed people and asked, based on if you needed a real estate agent, who would you hire? Almost 2/3 picked Mary, who was not real. We talked about that as a way of showing how the mere exposure, just being exposed to someone again and again and again, actually creates preference. That's what Jen is trying to leverage here, Gene rather. What Gene is saying is, I'm going to stay in touch, I'm going to stay in touch, I'm going to stay in touch. And then in that moment, at some point when you say, damn, this was actually a little harder than I thought it was, I'm going to talk to the person who's the most top of mind and position yourself in that spot. And we do that through kind of an 8x8, a structured 8x8 that 8 times over 8 weeks. Once a week, every week for 8 weeks, we're going to come back and add more value, right? And we can unpack how to do that in just a second. The thing that I just want to show you on this graphic, and then we'll get back into the PowerPoint, is that most agents give up way too quick. Most agents give up after the first week. I'm going to take a shot. I'm going to screw together the courage to be a hunter, because I'm not naturally a hunter. I'm going to tell you that the tiger is a hunter. The tiger is naturally a hunter, but it takes a lot of energy to be a hunter. And when you screw together the courage, if it's not in your DNA, you go ahead and you do it and you pounce, and if the prey gets away, I don't love that imagery, but you see where I'm going. Most of us give up. Now the tiger's going to starve because he's not going to go out and pick vegetables, right? So he can't give up, but we end up going and doing something else. Most of us, you start to look at this graphic, if we don't convert within the first week, by the second week, 50% of the agents are never going to make a second call. By the third week, it's about 30% of the agents still in the game. And by the fourth week, almost everyone has given up. And what we know is that a lot of folks, private sellers and expireds, need more time. They need more time to try it on their own before they're ready to give up the ghost, or they're not ready to go back so quickly. And so if we follow up and don't have success, and if we're one of the very few that follow up a second time or a third time, and we don't have success, we're done. That doesn't work with this group. This group is about time on task again and again and again and again. And whether your approach is more direct like Diana's, or whether your approach is more indirect like Gene's, the key to this group is consistency. The key to everything in sales is consistency, but this group probably as much or more than any other. It's super important that we have consistency with this group if we're going to have success. So let me go back into the PowerPoint. I talked about a pattern interrupt before. And the pattern interrupt is doing things differently, behaving in a way which is different from what's expected. It causes the brain to step back and say, hey, this isn't what I thought. We use pattern interrupts linguistically. Those of you who are my bold grads know how an embedded command works. I need a sip of water here. So somebody unmute and just tell me, how does an embedded command work? What is an embedded command? Who can do that? Took a look at the class list. I know there's people in here that know what embedded commands are. Who can sort of unpack that for me? All right, then I'm going to do it. An embedded command is an instruction or a command language inserted or embedded in a sentence. If the command of the thing that I want to plant into your unconscious is hire me, I'm going to embed that command in a sentence that says, if you feel comfortable with the things that we talk about tonight, are you prepared to hire me before the end of the evening? Hire me is a command that we've embedded into that sentence. And what makes it work really, really well is the little gap, the little break in the language, in the pattern, interrupting the pattern, the flow of what we say, so that we take a little pause before the command and a little pause after the command. Let me just kind of say it again 2 different ways. If you feel comfortable and confident with the things that I'm about to tell you, are you prepared to hire me tonight before the evening's over? That's just straight through. A little pause before and a little pause after causes the brain who hears you talking that says, oh, that's Hal talking, I'm going to go pay attention to something else. And then suddenly I paused for a smidge. if you feel comfortable and confident with the things that I'm about to tell you tonight, would you be prepared to hire me before the night is over? That little gap of a nanosecond before we said hire me, a little gap of a nanosecond before I said before the night is over, causes the brain, who was paying attention to something else, that says, wait, what? What just happened? I heard him talking and then he stopped, and now I've got to pay attention. And when the brain tunes back in again, what do they hear? They hear the command, hire me, which is communicated deeply into the subconscious. These are neurolinguistic sales techniques that we teach, and they're powerful, but pattern interruption, by simply doing things and breaking the pattern of what's expected, it causes us to pay attention, to re-engage, to reevaluate, creates a different opening to interpret. And that's really powerful, because when we're going into this group more than any other and trying to fight the bias of, I don't know if I like or trust salespeople, we cannot show up and look and sound like a salespeople without triggering that bias. We have to sound different. Good scripts, which are well rehearsed, give you a sense of confidence. Try to avoid scripted language, especially the old school salesy scripts with strangers. That don't let these salesy old Tom Ferry, Mike Ferry scripts work with strangers, because they just sound too much like what we would expect a salesperson to say, which triggers that bias. All right, let's move along here. How does that sound? Here's an old script that worked really, really well for a lot of people for a really, really long time, and they made a really, really lot of money on it. And so and while to say that, that's not to say that this script will never work. It's a harder script today, because in a post-internet age, in a post-social media age, people are just more savvy. They've heard more, and they're more jaded. The old Mike Ferry script says, hi, this is Hal with Keller Williams, and I'm calling about the home for sale. Is this the owner? I'm doing a survey of all the for sale by owners in the area, and I was wondering, and then we go through this litany of questions. If I sold this home, where would you go next? And it doesn't matter what they say, and you're going to respond, that's exciting. Then you move on to, how soon do you have to get there? Doesn't matter what they say, you're going to say fantastic. How would you rate your motivation on a scale of 1 to 10? They're going to give you a number, you're going to say good for you, and it is just two things here. We don't live in a world that strangers are going to let a stranger conduct a survey like this for very long. Even the most calm and patient people are not going to let you go too deep into your question, because it's not relevant to them. The old survey scripts don't work as well with strangers, because strangers don't give you the time of day. Heck, if I don't recognize your phone number, I ain't even picking up the freaking phone. So, and even if I do recognize your phone number, I may or may not, depends on how much time I have, right? If you're showing up, and tell me yourself, just put in the chat box, if a phone call rings and you do not recognize the number, I'm just going to do a quick survey in chat. Just type into the chat box whether you would or would not pick up the phone if you don't recognize the number typically. What's your typical response? Just write would or would not. I'd just like to do a quick survey on that. In the chat. Would not, no, would not. All right, you see my point. No way. And so here's the thing. Ain't nobody gonna let you do this script, right? They don't have the time. And they don't really care, because it's not relevant to them. So a better script, and this is a script that we used to teach for sale by owners in bold, where we saw them as a seller. That's the pattern interrupt. If I see you're selling your home, and I'm curious, where are you moving to? And that does sound a little bit scripty sometimes. And sometimes it can even engender some anger. Sometimes people say, what the hell business is that of yours? I don't have, what are you bothering me with that? And then you quickly reframe. The reason I called you, and you might even apologize there and try to build rapport. Hey, I apologize. I wasn't trying to, offend you in any way. The reason I called is I wanted to see if you might be a good candidate for any of our current listings. You see, every day, I spend time proactively calling potential buyers for our own listings. I don't just sit back and wait for buyers to appear. That is what you'd want an agent to do for you if you ever decided to hire an agent, isn't it? Right? That's a better script. And I think another better script is one from Kevin Ward. Kevin Ward is a well-known real estate coach and trainer. Used to be a KW coach. Now he started his own coaching company. And if you go out and check out Yes Masters is the name of his organization. He does a lot of really good real estate coaching. This is Kevin's script, which I really like. picks up the phone and he simply says, hey, I see that you're selling your home, and that's great. You know, we're kind of in the same business, so I'm curious, what can I do to help you? And then you zip and you wait. And some people will hang up, but that's a pattern interrupt. And the first person who talks loses here, so don't let it be you, right? What can I do to help you? Simply says, look, I see what you're trying to do. I know some things about how to do it, and I'm curious, how can I help you? If you ask a for sale by owner that question, what can I do to help you? There is one particular answer that will come up probably more than any other. Do anybody want to take a stab as to what that answer would be? You put it in the chat box or you can unmute.
Bring me a buyer.
Bring me a buyer. Martha, 99 times out of 100, that's it. And say, you know what? Bring me a buyer. And what Kevin does is he goes on to acknowledge it. He says, hey, that's a great idea. And certainly, you know, if I have any buyers that are a good fit for your home, then I'd be certainly happy to do that. He says, what I would tell you, though, as somebody who does this for a living, my question would be, do you just want to talk to my buyers, or would you prefer to have access to everyone's buyers? Because if you really want to have the best outcome, you're going to want to get in front of everyone's buyers, wouldn't you? And what he does is he starts to position himself that, yes, if I have a buyer, I'll bring it. And I'll be honest with you, I really do believe if you're working with buyers who are having a hard time in this inventory where everything seems like it's going into multiple bids, and you see it for sale by owner, if you've got a buyer in that community and in that price range, I would approach that FSBO first as an opportunity to bring your buyer. And I would try to bring my buyer and try to sell it to my buyer without competition. If my buyer doesn't want it, then it's a short step to talk to that seller about expanding the market. But you've already proven that you can bring buyers because you did it. But what I would do if I had a buyer, I'm not looking to try to list that FSBO and then suddenly have my buyer in competition all over again. If it makes sense for my buyer, we're going to take a look at it, and I'm going to write up an offer, and we're going to try to buy this thing off market without the seller having representation, because I believe that I can negotiate a really good deal. And if there's nobody else competing for this house, you've got a better chance of getting it, right? That's the way I would approach a for sale by owner. And if I didn't have a buyer or my buyer didn't want it, then we could talk about expanding the market. But this script is, I see that you're looking to sell your home. What can I do to help you? You know, I see Paul saying that a common answer is, how much would it cost me? That is a common thing that comes up. It's not usually first. It may be periodically, but the most common thing is, look, I'm actually willing to work with agents. It's not that I hate agents. It's just that I only want to pay an agent if they bring me a buyer. I don't want to pay an agent to market the house. So you do you and I'll do me, and we'll figure out a way to do this. If you've got a buyer, bring him in. That's usually what you're going to find. And as Kevin did, we then try to expand, not by telling them why that automatically is a bad idea, but we recognize that, hey, I can do that. And if I have a buyer, I intend to do that. And then if that doesn't work out, let's talk about how do we expand the market. Here's an even better script. And we sort of touched on it. I see you're selling your home. I'm sure that you're getting called by a lot of real estate agents right now. I revised this script, and let me talk about how I approach this. One of the things that we're trying to do in this revised script is we're trying to acknowledge the things that we think they would object to about us. The things that they don't like about salespeople is that we're pushy, is that we tend to not respect their desire to do it on their own. I know that sometimes we see people as putting a for sale sign in front of your house and calling it a help me sign. Let me tell you something. The for sale by owner does not see it as help me. The agent does, and the smart agent recognizes that you really can help them, but the seller doesn't see it as a help me sign. So a script that says, I saw that you had a help me sign on your front lawn, is a little arrogant and a little out of touch with what that person is really thinking. And it starts to sound too old school salesy. A better approach is built on the work of one of the great negotiators of all time, a guy by the name of Christopher Voss. You've heard me talk about him in other classes. Chris is the ex-FBI hostage negotiator, lead hostage negotiator in the FBI for international kidnappings for over 10 years. And he's written a lot extensively on negotiating. And one of the things that Chris learned is that there's certain things that you can do linguistically to break down resistance. And one of them is built on a psychological phenomenon that we call name it, tame it. And what name it, tame it is based on, it comes out of the work at University of Miami about 15 years ago. When people are in a heightened emotional state, when they are angry, when they are super jacked up, whatever, what happens is their logic centers of their brain shut down. When they get super emotionally charged up, they don't think rationally. And if I want you to talk to me, I can't let you be too emotional right now. And so if I'm talking to a salesperson and I'm the gazelle and the salesperson shows up looking like a lion, do you think the gazelle is going to become afraid? Yes. When that happens, their ability to hear us logically is going to shut down. What Name It, Tame It finds is that if you can ask people to give a name to the emotion that they're feeling, or at least to acknowledge it through listening to it, that part of the brain shuts off. It's almost as if you've turned a light switch. And this has been proven through empirical study using MRIs. If you look at the brain, the part of the brain that lights up when someone is in a heightened emotional state, when you ask them to name the emotion that you're feeling, I feel angry, boop, that part of the brain shuts off. They named it and it extinguished it. And when that feeling shuts off, the logic center of the brain re-engages. I need you to be in logic here. So I'm going to try to shut off your emotion. Now, it's not a good script to call the for sale by owner that says, I see that you're selling a home and I'm a real estate agent. How does that make you feel? That's not a great script. Because it is a pretty good pattern interrupt. They're going to be like, that you are the craziest real estate agent I've ever heard of. What are you talking about? It's a good pattern interrupt, but it's a bad script. A better script is to go through the recognition that if we name the experience for them, if we tell them how we think they're feeling or how they could be feeling, they're going to evaluate that. They're going to think about that. They're going to say, yes, that's what it is. And that feeling switch is going to shut off again. So a better script is this. I see you're selling your home, and I'm sure by now you must be getting called by a lot of real estate agents. And I'm sure that right now you're getting tired of it. Some of them are coming off as really pushy, as if they just want to get your listing. It's got to be frustrating, right? All those things. By you naming what you anticipate the experience is of being a for sale by owner who's getting hammered by agents and articulating it for them, what begins to happen is they're like, yeah, you know what? You actually understand this. You actually get what I'm going through, and it begins to break down the resistance. I see that you're selling your home. And I'm sure that right now you're getting called by lots of real estate agents. I'm sure that you must be getting really tired of it. Some of them might be coming off as pushy and just trying to get your listing. I really believe that you should try to sell this on your own if that's what you want to do. There's a pattern interrupt. Wait, what? You kind of understand me. You seem to understand what's going on in my head. And you're not doing the things that I expected an agent to do because everybody else launched right into when you sell your home, where you're going to go. I can help you get there. If I could show you how to sell homes quicker and blah, blah, blah. You're starting to sound different. I really believe that you should try to sell it on your own if that's what you want to do. That empowers them to say, hey, not only do you understand me, but you're supporting me. I'm kind of starting to like you. And yet, I do know a lot about selling homes. So I'm just wondering if there's anything that I can do to help you. It's taken this script. Let me go back to it. It's taken this, whoop, here it is, the Kevin Ward script. I see you're selling your home. That's great. We're in the same business. What can I do to help you? And it's amping it up by starting to name the emotions that you think they'd be feeling, break down that resistance, empower them to say, look, you've got free will. You can do what you want to do. If you want to do that, have at it. You do you all day long. If that's what you want, I'm here to support you. What can I do to help? And now they're going to say, bring me a buyer. And now you're in the position to move on with the rest of that script. I can bring a buyer. I'd like to preview the home, but honestly, is it just my buyer that you want, or is it everybody's buyer? You're having that conversation from the standpoint of somebody that they have a little bit more trust and respect for than somebody who they don't, right? The choice of how we use these scripts have to be updated for today's market. I think it's just too challenging of a market to be using the old 1980s scripts, right? Come from contribution. Everything that we do is come from contribution. What can I do to help you today? offer your unique expertise and your unique solutions that you can use in these unusual market conditions. You know, Mr. and Mrs. FSBO, I don't know if sometimes people will tell you, I've sold homes before. That's why I know I can do it. I bet you never sold a home in a global pandemic before. Would it be worth spending 20 minutes of time to just talk about some of the tools that we're finding in our industry have been helpful to help people learn how to market a home in this environment? And a lot of times people would say, well, why would I give them all my secrets? You're not. You're not going to give them all your secrets. You're going to give them the things that they can go out there and Google themselves. You're just going to bring them to them and make it easier so that they can start to like you and they can trust you, right? Steps for working with the for sale by owners. Prepare and know what you're going to say in advance. Create an 8x8 smart plan. Know this is time on task over time. The likelihood that you're going to convert in one appointment is low. It does happen, especially if you're really good at these scripts. I know a lot of folks who are working through DRED's coaching program, and if you really do want to learn how to do for sale by owners at a high level, I'd encourage you to take push when it comes around that. David does a remarkable job of this group of for sale by owners and expireds with the scripts that he uses. I think you can even amp the scripts up a little bit higher, as I was talking about before. But when you know what you're going to say and you have a customized smart plan, even graduates of push, even David himself, and I coached David for a while, you don't get these first time out. These are build relationship over time. And it's usually going to be time on task, and have a plan. The smart plan allows you to figure out, what am I going to do as my first touch? What am I going to do as my second touch? What is my third touch? I like the idea of previewing a home and then asking, is there something that I can do? Giving them a leave behind. You know what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, one of the things that I see is that buyers who come through the home are going to expect that the seller has completed a seller's disclosure form. Even if you're a private seller and you're not being represented by a real estate agent or a brokerage, the consumer protection laws still require you as a private seller to disclose everything of a material nature that that would impact the buyer's decision making. And the way that we've done it in our industry is we have this 6-page form that we have a seller's disclosure form. I'd be happy to leave you a blank copy of this. You can just fill it out and make copies of it so that any buyer who's interested, you can just give it to them. Saves you the trouble of having to answer it again and again and again. Is that something that would be beneficial to you, right? That's an easy leave behind item of value that you can give on the first touch, right? But what we know, and I showed you the graphic, most people, if they don't convert on the first week, 50% of them aren't going back again. Only 30% are going back a third time. And by the time it's fourth week, almost everybody's out. You need to stay in longer than that. What would be the reason why you would call a second time? And so I'm going to ask people to unmute and just throw out an idea. What would be your entry into calling back a for sale by owner or an expired if you didn't convert them the first time? How would you reach, what would be the reason for that call? Because that's where I think sometimes agents struggle, is they already told me they didn't want to hire me. I gave them an item of value. Any thoughts? Well, here's how I would think about it. You got to have another reason to go back and add value. And I know I'm dating myself in terms of age, but there was a TV show that was back on in the 1970s, and it was Columbo, and Peter Falk played this absent-minded detective. And one of the things that was the hallmark of that show is he'd go through the whole police drama, and Peter Falk at the very end, as he was walking out, and he would have the suspect dead to rights, and it would be looking like he didn't know what he was going to do, and he would just turn around and he would go, one more question. He would ask the key question, and the whole puzzle would come together. It was really a fun show. If you're younger than me, which every one of you is probably, just go YouTube and you'll find some good stuff there. But the point is, the magic was in the afterthought question. You know what? I have one more question for you. And that can be a lead-in to a reason to call. You know what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it's Hal again. I know that you're still on the market. I was thinking about you. I had one more thing that I thought I might want to share this idea. It's just, I was thinking about you, and I thought that this might be useful to you. And then what's your second item of value going to be? And you get to decide. Maybe it's, I don't know if you have any way of determining whether any buyers who submit an offer on your home are truly qualified, but let me give you the name of my very favorite lender and mortgage rep. And what I would encourage you to do is before you take your house off the market with anyone, please have him or her give you, just take a look at your buyer's credentials. Because look, one of the things that we know is that a lot of the reason why buyers choose to buy directly from sellers is that if they've already been determined not creditworthy by a lender, then no agent is going to spend their time. And so they're out there on their own. I don't want you to get tied up with a bogus buyer. And so I want you to just, here's her number. Before you commit to anybody, have her run their numbers. Because if she says that they can qualify, then I would trust her. I've used her a million times. If she says, I don't think it's as good a solid deal as you think it is, I'm not sure they can get it done, then I'd encourage you, don't take your house off the market for just anybody, right? That's coming from contribution, right? And that could be a reason for touch 2. What's your reason for touch 3? What's your reason for touch 4? What you need is a schedule of touches. Can anybody just throw an idea out? I gave you 2. I gave you the seller's disclosure form and the lender. Is there anything else that you could offer that would be of value to a for sale by owner that you could offer as a way of staying in touch? Just throw some ideas out in the chat box or on mute.
Okay, so in my experience, that is very limited. I went to see one that I noticed that was overpriced, and I brought a CMA.
Okay, let me give you a market analysis, right? Let me just show you. Here's what ultimately is going to happen. When an appraiser looks at a house, these are the comps, right? And so just even showing the comps and giving a CMA is a great one. And you know what? You could even amp that up. Here's another thing that I've seen people do is to start to say, you know, you've been on the market now and for 2 or 3 weeks. And in that period of time, you know, there's been 7 other homes in the neighborhood that have come on that are roughly in the same neighborhood and roughly in the same price range. I have a lockbox key and I've got some free time on Saturday morning. If you want, I'd be happy to just spend an hour. We'll just take a quick run through. I'll walk through these houses so that you can preview them and you can see firsthand how you stack up to the competition so you can evaluate kind of where you fit in and whether or not your price makes sense. And maybe it reinforces your price. Maybe it causes you to think about, but even offering to take people out as a tour of their competition is an item of value that I have seen people use very effectively with for sale by owners. What else could you do? I love that idea of the CMA. What else? I'll ask for one more and then we're going to move. Anybody can play. An open house. Conduct an open house. That could be one, right? You know, it's one of the things that Jean in her indirect approach talks about is we're both in the interest of trying to find buyers. And so one of the things that I know is that if I can use my marketing leverage to bring more buyers to your home and I host the open house, perhaps we can both, right? Lots of different things you can do. Put a plan together, touch 1, touch 2, touch 3, touch 4. What we find is that most for sale by owners convert usually between the 6th and the 8th touch. And almost 90% of the agents stop after 4. You see the math doesn't add up. Go ahead, Martha.
I had a question. So can we offer to do a virtual open house?
Sure.
Is that allowed? Oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
Sure could be.
Okay.
Again, if you're going to do that, what I would want you to do is just have a quick conversation with your broker in terms of how they would like that to look, right? You're not offering representation specifically. You're just, you know, so make sure you get your broker's blessing on how that has to look, right? But you could do that for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
What about a house that visually, I mean, you're standing outside looking at it or you drove by and it's not in the best of condition? It's kind of touchy. You know, we all have lists of our favorite allied resources contractors, but
that's definitely on the touch list.
You have to be kind of careful, I guess, how you phrase that.
Yeah, you could. And yet, I think conversations about staging, an article that you could leave them behind on the importance of how much a properly staged home increases the value of a home. And there's reports out there that NAR puts together that you could share. And once they've agreed that homes that look better and get more money, then we can talk about what we do to stage the inside and what we do to stage the outside, and that kind of backs into that conversation, right? you never want to lead with, did you know your kid is ugly? I mean, that's just a hard conversation to have, right? All right, let me move along here because we're moving fast here. Prepare for the long haul. It's a game of touches. I said that most FSBOs convert after touch 6 and touch 8, and yet most agents bail out after touch 4. Actually, most agents, 50% bail out after touch 1, 30% are left after touch 2, and almost everybody's out after touch 3, right? Make sure unique challenges that sellers face that you can talk to them about, how to make sure that they're maintaining safety when they're showing their home. It can be safety from people who would rob them. It can be safety in the COVID environment. Lots of information now about how to keep a home safe when you're showing it. Market exposure, qualifying buyers, all the different things that you can add value around for FSBOs, which I think is worth doing. Expireds. Learn the technique that allows you to function in a virtual environment for sure, right? It's an action that we needed to do with expireds because if we, in the pre-COVID days, we would just try to get that relisted. In the post-COVID days, a lot of it is how are we going to show that home to people who don't physically want to come in. So one of the lead-ins with expireds is to show that you do have mastery around virtual showings, right? And if you don't have mastery, go out and start to get it. If you see any mutual contacts in social media, that is a really interesting thing that can be modeled from agents who do for sale by owners and expireds at a high level. They go into their Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn accounts and they start to see, do they have any friends that cross over? It's not hard to figure out who you are. I can do a Remind property search and I can figure out your name and where you are. It's just now, I'm going to go into my social networks and see, do we have anybody who's a shared contact? Because I'm going to try to leverage those shared contacts. About 6 years ago, I saw a presentation at Keller Williams Mega Camp where they were giving awards to the top 5 agents, the new Rookie of the Year awards, I guess it was. And I guess the guy who had won Rookie of the Year for Keller Williams International that year had closed in excess of 80 transactions in his first year, which is really good. He was in a market that was a lower price point, so he didn't make as much money as he would have here. He was also an ordained minister who was well known in the community and already had kind of the like and the trust factor going for him, which helps. Make no mistake, it helps. But one of the things that he did do, which I thought was genius, was for all the expireds and FSBOs, he would look into his networks and find out who did he know that knew them that he could leverage with a call that said, hey, Paul, you know, I see that we're both friends with the Smiths over on Elm Street. And I don't know if you knew this, but the Smiths are actually trying to sell their home by themselves, or the Smiths had tried to sell their home and unfortunately they didn't have success. You know, it's my intention to give the Smiths a call on Wednesday of this week. Would you be willing, because I know that you know them, would you be willing to just give them a heads up call, just reach out to them or send them an email and just say, hey, you know what, I was talking to my buddy Hal from Keller Williams and he said he was planning on giving you a call. And I just want to let you know that he's a decent guy. You know, whether you choose to use him or not is your decision to make. But I just want you to, you know that he's a decent guy. And if you're going to talk to a realtor, I think he's somebody you might want to talk to anyway. That kind of asking a common contact to kind of grease the skids before kind of that social proof helps a lot. If you've got the ability to leverage that, I would encourage you to try to leverage that, right? Other things, practice the scripts and objection handlers and have the confidence of knowing what to say. One of the reasons why I like David's class on FSBOs and Expireds so much is they really spend a lot of time drilling their scripts and objection handlers, and so they know what to say. They're never caught off guard. If you're a graduate of that course, again and again and again, same with a lot of the KW courses like Bold and whatever, you know what to say. You become audible ready is the way that I've heard it described. I heard an interview with Ken Blanchard, who is a writer, a business author, who wrote the book, The 1 Minute Manager, who those of you that have management background recognize his name probably. And he was interviewing Don Shula, who was the coach of the Miami Dolphins, the only professional sports team in history who ever went entirely undefeated. And what he talked about was that in order to be on his team, his NFL team, he needed to know that you were audible ready. And what he meant by that was he needed to know that you had practiced that playbook and rehearsed and studied that playbook so well that when Dan Marino, who at that time was his quarterback, went to the line of scrimmage every professional quarterback goes to the line of scrimmage with a plan. And they've got a couple of plans. If I'm going to try to get the ball to my first target and that target is covered, I'm going to try to go to the second target. If the second target is covered, I'm going to go to the third option. And if everything has fallen apart, I may have to keep it. Well, what happens is when the quarterback gets to the line of scrimmage and he looks at the way the defense is set up, if he can tell by the way people are positioned on the field that the plan that he had was probably not going to be successful, then what he does is he calls an audible and he starts to call out signals at the line of scrimmage. He starts calling Omaha 18, blue 26, and what he's doing isn't writing a whole new play. He's not making something up that he's graphing for the first time. What he's telling his team is, hey, you know, back in the huddle, we planned to do this, and this isn't going to work. And so I'm changing it up through these codes, and we're going to do a different play that we had practiced before. We didn't intend to do it here, but now we have to do it here. If you don't know what the new play changes for your job assignment, that's when you start seeing people moving up and down the line. If you don't know how it changes what you need to do, if you haven't memorized the playbook so that when Marino starts calling these audibles, you know how it impacts your next action, you ain't going on the field. You have to be audible ready, and we do too, because we don't know what they're going to say. The challenge with scripts, and when we read them, is that there's assumption that if I say this, they're going to say that, and they never say that. The thing is, do I know what to do despite that? And that only comes through practice and repetition. You've got to practice these scripts again and again and again. You've got to practice your objection handlers again and again and again, right? There's an objection handler framework, which we're gonna probably not have time to get too deep into it, but I'm just gonna share it with you. It comes out of the work of Fanatical Prospecting, right? The book Fanatical Prospecting, and it's kind of a four-step process. It says, look, what we know is that conditions, which are circumstances that prevent people from moving forward, are different than fear. Objections are based in fear. And so if an objection comes up that I've triggered a fear state in you, here's the best way to break this down, right? First thing I'm going to do is first step is the ledge. He calls it the ledge, and I'm blanking out on the author's name. I've said it a million times before, but the Fanatical Prospecting and Objection Handling book. The first thing is kind of an acknowledgement. And it's that the two of us are going to sit in this dangerous place together. It's just done through acknowledgement. Hey, I can appreciate how you feel. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to explore that fear. We're not going to try to talk them out of it. We're not going to try to tell them why they're wrong to be afraid. We're going to say, lean in. Tell me about that fear. It triggers the name it, tame it phenomenon. If I can get you to give a name to that fear, it's going to lose its power over you. So let's talk about it. What are you the most afraid of? And then we're going to challenge that reasoning and create alternatives. And so here's how that might sound. An example of how you would handle, I want to sell it on my own because I don't want to pay a commission. The lead should be, it's a pattern interrupt. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Brokerage fees can be expensive. You lead with a pattern interrupt. You lead with something that they didn't expect you to say because it causes them to say, wait, what? Right? It's an acknowledgement, but it's a pattern interrupt at the same time. They don't expect you to say, hey, I don't want to pay a commission, which is why I want to sell my house on my own. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. They're like, wait, you were hoping I'd say that? That's a pattern interrupt. Brokerage fees can be expensive. It's an acknowledgement, and then it moves into, not let me show you how immediately I can get you more money so that neutralizes that fear. It moves into, what is it about the brokerage fee that concerns you the most? Lean in, talk about it. I'm afraid if I have to pay you, I'm not going to net enough. And then what would happen if you don't net enough money? Well, if I don't net enough money, then I can't buy my next house, or I can't buy the house that I wanted to. What would happen if you had to make some sacrifices on that next house? Then I can't do this at all, or I don't want to do this. And you can start to see what it is that's driving this. It's not about saving the money. It's about, if I don't net enough, I can't get what I want, and I'm afraid of settling. And we get people to talk about that, lean in. And by talking about that, it loses a little bit of their grip. And then we move on to challenging that reasoning. Does more market pressure create a higher sell price or a lower sell price? Well, you know what? More market pressure would actually create a higher sale price, the more people that want an item, the more that makes a ton of sense. If I can show you how I can create more market pressure than you can create on your own, which would actually drive that price up to a point where you're going to net more money regardless of my commission, is that worth thinking about? That's ultimately the script that we wanted to say, but we needed them to lean into what they were afraid of first before they were in a place where they could hear it, right? That's how I'm talking about modifying scripts. We moved too quick in the old school scripts into problem solution. This is what I want. If I can show you this, would it be worth talking? We missed that all important connecting step of what is it the thing that you're the most afraid of, right? All right, it is 12:31. I'm over time. We're going to wrap here. This opportunity for sale by owners and expireds is big. I think that right now, especially expireds is big, and this time of year, I think for sale by owners is big too. What we know, it's not the biggest part of the market. It is a smaller subset of the market. However, one of the things that we do know, which makes this a unique opportunity, is that we know that these people are needing to or expressed at least interest in selling a home. And so it puts them in a different target category. But they've also either had a bad experience or have outright said they don't want us. And so it puts them into a more resistant category as well. And so one of the things that we need to do is leverage all the tools that we have, linguistic tools, strategic tools, to break those resistances down. My personal strategy as a coach and as an agent would be anybody who expires, anybody who's for sale by owner inside of my sphere of geographic marketing, where they would have been exposed to my brand, where I won't show up as a threat as quickly, as a tiger immediately. Everybody who's in my footprint is going to hear from me if you're for sale by owner and expired. If you're way outside, even though I know that you're looking to sell your home, and I may be pretty polished in my scripts, if you're way outside of my market, I may or may not choose to go there. And the reason for that is I hope to have enough other business from other lead generation strategies, namely my database and my marketing and prospecting inside of my geographic area. But the further outside you go of a market where you're known and respected, the more you position yourself as the tiger, which just makes it harder to overcome. Not to say you can't. It's just, you know, I think that there's other ways to go after that. So FSBOs and expireds, for me, all day long, every day, inside your geographic footprint, selectively outside. Give me a couple of takeaways. Any ahas from today, and we'll kind of wrap it up here. I'm hoping for one or two, because we're over time. I know a couple of folks have had to jump.
I really like how you customize the script to make it more manageable, like more customized to the situation, instead of being so attached to what the script says.
Yeah, you know, I think that's really important. I'm glad, Martha, that you pointed that out. I think you got to learn your scripts. But on top of that, you really have to learn language. You know, I'll tell you, I was a music major in college. Let me just share this with you. I won't go too long. One of the things that I learned in college was this. In order to get in, you had to be able to perform. I was a keyboard major in college. And I wasn't a primary music. I was a music therapy major, actually. I was in the music department, not as a performance primary, but you had to declare a primary instrument, and I was a keyboard player. Well, look, you got to know your scales. You've got to practice your scales. If you want to have any dexterity on the keyboard and fluidity, you've got to be able to know your scales. And yet, here's the thing that I found. There was a really different approach to music between people that were classically trained and people that were jazz trained. And we had both at Montclair State in the music department where I was. And I was trained more in college by classical musicians. I was trained more prior to that in a different model. What classical musicians do is they take a look at the notes and they play those notes as written. And they interpret that music through phrasing and volume and all these different things, and they can make it their own, but they don't change the notes. What they see is what they type or what they play. Jazz musicians learn how to improv. And what that means is that they learn all the scales and they learn the technical skills, but they learn how to play off of each other. When you go to a great jazz concert, they don't have music in front of them because what they know is We've learned the rules of improvisation. When you do this, it gives me the freedom to kind of do a bunch of different things. And when I do those things, it frees you up to do a lot of different things. Think about improv comedy. Back in the early days of Saturday Night Live, back in the early days when Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi and all those folks would hit the stage at 11:30, they didn't frequently have scripts. They just kind of were playing off each other, and they had honed and practiced the art of improvisational comedy so that they could play off each other, and it was magical. It was magical. You got to learn how to play the instrument. You've got to learn the scripts, and then on top of that, you've got to learn the rules of language so that you can learn how to improv a little bit, so that you can learn how to alter the notes a little bit, so that when people show up in different ways, and I need to break down resistances, what techniques language-wise do I use to do that? That's a different level that can be learned, and I'd encourage you to learn that, right? Anything else? Good takeaway there.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we're over time. I'm gonna wrap this up. I appreciate you all. Thank you for being here. I will see you all again on Wednesday, all right?
Wow.
Have a good day. We'll talk to you all soon. Stay cool. It's starting to get warm out there today.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.